In 1974, a woman was found murdered in her home in Wichita, Kansas. The killer had bound and tortured her before taking her life. This was the first known murder attributed to the BTK Killer. Dennis Rader, who would later become infamous for his crimes, began his killing spree in Wichita, targeting women in their homes. He bound his victims, often using items from their own homes, and then tortured them before killing them. The method he used, binding, torturing, and killing, became the basis for his self-chosen moniker, BTK. His first victim marked the beginning of a killing pattern that would span nearly 2 decades. Investigators would later discover that Rader had stolen personal items from his victims, including underwear and driver's licenses, which were later found in his possession. Despite his early crimes, Rader abruptly ceased his killings in 1979, leaving the case as one of the most infamous cold cases in American history. In 1979, Rader abruptly ceased his killings, leaving the case as one of the most infamous cold cases in American history. For over a decade, investigators struggled to connect the dots, as the killer vanished from public view and left no trace of his whereabouts. Between 1985 and 1991, Rader committed 3 additional murders that were not initially linked to BTK, but were later confirmed to be his work through DNA and items found in his possession. Despite the lack of activity, the pattern of the crimes remained clear, and the fear of the unknown continued to haunt the communities of Wichita and Park City. The killer's silence only deepened the mystery, and the absence of new victims did little to ease the terror that had already taken root. Investigators pored over every detail, but without a suspect or a lead, the case remained unsolved. The BTK Killer had disappeared into the shadows, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a chilling legacy that would not be broken for nearly 2 decades. In 1979, the murders abruptly ceased. No new victims were discovered. No further messages arrived from the killer. The investigation, once driven by urgency and fear, stalled. For more than 10 years, detectives worked without fresh leads or fresh blood. The BTK Killer had disappeared from public view, but the weight of his crimes remained. The families of the victims, already living with the pain of loss, had no resolution in sight. The case became one of the most perplexing mysteries in American law enforcement. Yet, despite the silence, the killer was not idle. He was simply watching. And by the early 2000s, he would once again reveal himself, setting the stage for a confrontation that would finally bring him to justice. In the years following his first killings, Dennis Rader remained hidden, but his hand was not yet done. Between 1985 and 1991, 3 more women were found dead in their homes, their bodies bound, their lives cut short. At the time, these crimes were not linked to BTK. Investigators had no reason to suspect the same killer was at work again. In 1974, a series of violent crimes began in Wichita, Kansas. The killer, who later called himself BTK, left behind more than just victims. He left behind a trail of taunting letters. These letters, typed with precision and signed with the initials BTK, were sent to police and media outlets, describing the crimes in detail and hinting at more murders to come. They were both a challenge and a clue, offering a glimpse into the mind of the killer. For 13 years, the letters stopped. In 2004, they began again. This time, the messages carried a different tone, more confident, more deliberate. BTK hinted at new crimes, as if testing the patience of law enforcement. The letters were a puzzle, a game of psychological warfare. Then, in February 2005, the trail led to Dennis Rader. Items he had mailed to police were traced back to him. The letters, once a mystery, had become the key to his capture. The taunting had ended. The killer had been found. Among the many letters sent to police and media during the 1970s, one stood out, a message that would later define the killer's identity. The words, "bind, torture, kill," were written in bold, a chilling signature that would become his name. This was no random message. It was a declaration, a taunt, and a warning. It was the first time the killer referred to himself by the initials BTK, a moniker that would haunt Wichita for decades. The letters were meticulously crafted, often detailing the crimes in graphic detail and offering a glimpse into the mind of the killer. What investigators couldn't have known at the time was that these letters were not just a means of terror, they were also a trail, one that would eventually lead to the man behind the mask. For years, the letters remained a puzzle, a taunting echo from the killer's dark world. But in 2004, when Rader sent another letter after a long silence, the words, "bind, torture, kill," would once again surface, this time as a clue. Dennis Rader was born in Pittsburgh, Kansas, the oldest of 4 sons. His father, William Elvin Rader, was a former Marine and a worker for Kansas Gas Service. His mother, Dorothea May Rader, was a bookkeeper. Both parents were members of the Zion Lutheran Church. They worked long hours and, in later years, Rader said he felt neglected at home. His father was described as strict and God-fearing, but not abusive. Growing up in Wichita, Rader was interested in novels, comic books, fishing, and Cub Scouting. Yet from a young age, he harbored sadistic sexual fantasies about torturing women who were trapped and helpless. To his family and neighbors, Rader was a devoted husband and father. This image helped him conceal the crimes that began before his daughter, Carrie Rawson, was born in 1974. Rawson recalls a childhood filled with normalcy, but also with night terrors and a fear of home invasion. She now believes these were her subconscious reacting to a presence in the house she could not name. Among the items recovered from Dennis Rader's home in 2005 were personal effects belonging to his victims, a driver's license, a piece of clothing, and other keepsakes. These objects, collected over decades, were not only disturbing mementos, but also crucial evidence in linking Rader to the murders. Each item bore the mark of a life taken, a personal connection that the killer had preserved in his possession. Investigators later confirmed that these items had been collected during the years of his killings, some dating back to the early 1970s. The presence of these items in Rader's home, along with DNA evidence found on one of the victim's driver's licenses, played a key role in his identification. What remains unclear is how Rader chose which items to keep, and whether he ever saw them as a form of control or a twisted tribute. These objects, now stored in evidence lockers, serve as a chilling reminder of the lives he took and the secrets he held for decades. In 2004, Dennis Rader sent his first letter in 13 years, reigniting a case that had long been dormant. The message, though brief, contained enough detail to suggest he was still involved in crimes. It was the first real lead investigators had received since 1979. These letters, filled with taunts and cryptic references, were more than just messages. They were a deliberate attempt to draw attention back to the BTK case. Within months, the letters led to the discovery of items linked to Rader, including personal effects from victims that had been in his possession for decades. In February 2005, those items provided the evidence needed to trace the letters back to their sender. This breakthrough, years in the making, finally placed Rader on the path to being identified and arrested. The case, once one of the most infamous cold cases in American history, was now moving toward resolution. In February 2005, a package arrived at a Wichita police station. Not the usual anonymous letter, but something different. Inside were items that had been mailed by Dennis Rader himself. Law enforcement traced the sender, and the trail led directly to him. This was the first time in years that the BTK Killer had left a physical trace. For decades, the case had been a puzzle with no clear pieces. Now, the pieces were falling into place. The items included personal effects from victims, some of which had been missing since the 1970s. Investigators matched these items to evidence already in their possession, confirming a link to Rader. It was the breakthrough they had been waiting for, a connection that could no longer be ignored. Within weeks, Rader was arrested. The case, once one of the most infamous cold cases in American history, was finally closing. But what had taken years to uncover would take even longer to fully understand. In 2005, Dennis Rader stood before a judge and pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder. The words confirmed what investigators had long suspected but never proven. His confession ended a decades-long hunt for the BTK Killer, a name that had become synonymous with terror in Wichita. Rader was arrested in February 2005 after items he mailed to law enforcement were traced back to him. The evidence included personal effects from his victims, items he had kept for years. The revelation of his identity shattered the lives of those closest to him, particularly his daughter, Carrie Rawson. Rawson struggled with grief, public scrutiny, and emotional trauma in the years that followed. She was forced to confront the reality of her father's crimes, a truth she had never known. She later described experiencing night terrors and a deep fear of home invasion as a child, though she only understood the cause years later. The arrest and trial marked the end of one chapter. But for Carrie, the struggle with the weight of her father's actions was just beginning. The sentencing took place in a courtroom where the weight of decades of terror was finally brought to a close. In 2005, Dennis Rader pleaded guilty to his crimes and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life sentences. The judge's words marked the end of a reign of fear that had spanned nearly 30 years. Rader's victims, mostly women, had been targeted in their homes, bound, tortured, and killed in ways that left entire communities shaken. Now, he would spend the rest of his life behind bars. He is currently incarcerated at the El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas, where he will remain for the duration of his sentence. The case, once one of the most infamous cold cases in American history, was finally solved. The letters he had sent over the years, filled with taunts and cryptic messages, had led investigators to him. Now, the man who called himself BTK is no longer free to cause harm. His sentence ensures that he will never again walk among the people he terrorized. Dennis Rader was transferred to El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas shortly after his arrest in 2005. The facility, a maximum security prison, holds some of the state's most dangerous inmates. Rader's cell is small, with a narrow bed and a single window that offers little more than a view of the prison yard. The environment is stark, designed to isolate and contain. He has spent the majority of his life behind bars, serving 10 consecutive life sentences for his crimes. The walls of his cell now hold the silence he once used to haunt the homes of his victims. His current incarceration marks a stark contrast to the life he once led on the outside. A man who for decades walked among neighbors, attended church, and raised a family. Now, he exists in a world of controlled light, routine, and separation from the world he once knew. Kerry Rawson grew up in a home that appeared normal, filled with the sounds of family and the routines of a quiet suburban life. Her father, Dennis Rader, was a church-going man, a devoted husband, and a respected member of the community. But behind closed doors, the reality was far darker. In 2005, FBI agents arrived at her doorstep with news that shattered her world. Her father had been identified as the BTK Killer, responsible for the deaths of at least 10 women. The documentary My Father, The BTK Killer, captures Rawson's journey as she confronts the truth of her childhood, the trauma of her father's crimes, and the emotional toll of being the daughter of a serial killer. She recalls a mix of closeness and fear, memories of bedtime stories, and unshakable nightmares. As she searches for answers, she also grapples with the moral weight of helping investigators locate more victims. Her visit to Rader in prison brings no closure, only a haunting silence and a fantasy that once included her name. The identities of some victims were only confirmed years later through DNA evidence and personal items found in Rader's possession. Despite his confession, the exact number of victims remains a subject of debate. Investigators have confirmed at least 10 murders, but some experts suggest there may have been more. The records are incomplete, and not all details about the victims' lives or final moments are known. Rader's own accounts do not fully resolve these gaps. Even now, in the quiet of his prison cell, some questions remain unanswered. Kerry Rawson faced her father in a sterile prison visiting room, the weight of years pressing between them. She asked about the victims, about the lives he had taken. Rader answered in riddles, his words carefully measured. He spoke of a fantasy he had written, his own dark fiction, in which her name appeared. She pressed him, but he turned away. The encounter left her with more questions than answers. For years, she had tried to reconcile the man she knew with the monster he was. Now, she stood at the edge of that truth, unable to look away. The legacy of BTK lingers, not just in the crimes, but in the lives it shattered, and the families left to pick up the pieces.
Dennis Rader remains incarcerated at El Dorado Correctional Facility in Kansas, where he will spend the rest of his life. Identified and arrested in 2005, he pleaded guilty to 10 counts of first-degree murder and was sentenced to 10 consecutive life terms. His crimes, spanning nearly 2 decades, left a lasting mark on the communities of Wichita and Park City. Though the case is officially solved, the full extent of his actions remains a subject of reflection. The prison walls hold him, but the questions he left behind continue to echo. If you're ready for another story that won't let you look away, subscribe.